I want to say thank you to Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman, who is our sponsor for our CEO Chat series. If it wasn't for them, we would not be able to bring you these amazing interviews that we are able to conduct here with their support. They have a strong initiative for women, and that's why we're able to bring this to you. And today we have a very special guest and a very good friend of mine. This is Alexa Raad. Alexa is I like to tell people, one of the most influential people in the world, or at least in Washington, D.C., and you have no idea who she is, and that's what's so great about living here. So you used to be the CEO of .org, the CEO of .mobi, and we're going to find out about how you ended up doing all of this work. And if you don't know what this means to be the CEO of .org or .com or .mobi, that's called top-level domains. And top-level domains are the extensions that you see when you have your website posted. If it's .org, .gov, whatever that is a top-level domain. And there are companies and businesses and people that own those and have a responsibility working through what's called ICANN at managing domains that we are then able to buy and designate as our business or cause or whatever else we're doing. So Alexa, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, my pleasure.
So I want to go back and talk a little bit. How many people have seen the movie Argo? Okay, it's pretty much, you got your hands on the edge of your seat and your palms are sweaty as you listen to this incredible story. You have an Argo story. You were born in Iran, correct?
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about your family and what your family was like and what it was like living when you were born in Iran.
I lived there until I was about 11 years old, and it was I had a semi-privileged childhood. My father was a physician and an educator, and very normal childhood in a lot of ways. But now looking back at it, I realize that it was also very isolated because I certainly wasn't privy to, what the other classes, how they lived. But when the revolution happened in 1978, I was with my mom in Europe, and in Iran it was censored, so you didn't get the news, and it was very clear that Iran wasn't going to be the same. So we left Iran right after the Shah left and before Khomeini came, so during that period of chaos. And I remember, Cynthia and I have talked about this, when I watched the movie Argo, certainly didn't expect it, but there's a scene in the movie where they're trying to leave the country through Mehrabad airport, and everything's in chaos, and there's all these Revolutionary Guards running around. That's exactly, to me, that brought back a lot of memories, because that's exactly how it was for us, leaving during the martial law. We were not supposed to be on the street. It was my mom taking, us three kids, and we left on the last military airplane, cargo plane, leaving Iran under the Shah's regime. And at the airport, it was exactly like that.
Well, let's go back a little bit. Tell us about the journey to leaving, because your family didn't know you're going to be able to leave. It's the last plane. So as you're aware, it was the last Americans out of, if you've seen Argo, there was the U.S. embassy was there. They were overtaken by rebels. They were held hostage, but a number of people got out of the embassy who were Americans, and they were given protection at the Canadian embassy. But Iran wanted those prisoners held back, but they didn't know that they had gotten out. They didn't know who was there. So it was through this, and this was just released recently, and it was through the fact that the secret intelligence here fomented this plan to have somebody come in from America who's making a movie going into Iran, and then provided undercover of false identities to get them out, to create these new passports, because Canadians were now would be held liable for this as well. So, and at the very end of the movie, as you see them leaving, getting out of the airport, how it's by the skin of their teeth. It is just, and your journey, so you find out that you can leave. Your family gets to leave, and your mother has to make the decision. What do you take? You live in a privileged family. You've got a house full of beautiful things. What do you decide to do?
My parents found out the night before that we had a spot on this cargo plane, and so, what do you take? And I took my diaries. I had kept a diary ever since I was young, so I took my diaries. I took some clothes. but I remember you can go around the house and are you going to take a painting? You know, so you really have to leave with what's, you know, the clothes on your back and whatever, you know, valuables you can take with you. And it's a really great lesson for somebody who's, you know, at least my age, because you're young enough to understand, but not too old to be so jaded about it. So I understood at that time that, you know, anything that you have can be taken away from you at a moment's instance. And that it's ultimately up to you, you know, to determine your path. It's really nobody else. So it's up to you to make a new future. It's up to you to get educated. You can't count on what your family is going to give you. You can't count on, you know, what privilege you have. And it's been shown over and over again, you know, not just because of political circumstances, but also because of economic circumstances where, you know, over in a day, your whole entire life changes and you have a choice. Either you become a victim or you say, you know what, I'm going to make it.
You know, this is always where we pause, because sometimes, invariably, somebody shares something that is incredible, incredible wisdom. And it really is up to you to make the life you want. You may have everything, you may lose everything, but it's up to you. And I think that's what's so great about America, about the United States, is that, and you look at it time and time again, people come here with $5, $6, with nothing, and build a life.
That's right.
And it's really up to you, and that's a very powerful message. So you now, and has anybody ever been on a military cargo plane? They're like this great, big, huge thing where there's places for cargo, and the seats are just kind of, they can kind of put seats in and take them out. I was on one when I left Japan, and it was a medical evacuation flight. So I was just leaving as a regular passenger, but so that's kind of.
So it makes you wish for economy on United, doesn't it?
Yeah, it makes economy on United look good for a 24-hour flight. Yeah. So. And the way they take off, they kind of go, they don't take off like a normal plane goes like this. It's kind of like you feel like you're in a, it takes, I don't know why, it's just the way that it builds things. But so you are driving there. Tell us what happened on the route when you're going to the airport that day. It's such an incredible story.
My dad was driving, my mom and, you know, 3 kids in the back. And of course it's martial law, so you have to be on the streets, because if you are, and it's, you know, it's chaos. Anybody, any hoodlum with a gun really can take your life in their own hands, and you know your life changes based on a decision of an 18-year-old wielding a gun. So we got stopped on the way, and they asked us to roll down the window, and you know at that point they can ask you any kind of questions with a gun to your face. And my mom, with her maternal instinct, she sort of, broke the situation by by talking to the Revolutionary Guard and saying, "What are you doing? There's kids in the back. Why are you pointing a gun?" Almost like she was his mother. And it's amazing, it sort of stopped them. And her protecting her brood, her kids, from having a gun pointed, sort of changed the whole context, and he let us pass through.
Did you realize at that moment, because you were so young, how serious the situation was?
I'd never had a gun pointed, at me, but I'd seen enough westerns, and to know that it was
not good.
It was pretty good, pretty serious.
So you make it out to the airport, and you're on this cargo plane. Tell us a little bit about what's going on there and who's on this flight.
It was really just women and children of, the regime, those who were lucky enough to be able to get out and get a seat on this plane. And the whole plane was packed with crates and crates of things that they were taking. Obviously some of them had more advanced notice than we had, and so there's, incredible valuables in these crates. And the one thing my mom had done is, she just took her jewelry, and it was winter, so she had us wear her jewelry, all 3 of us kids, and put scarves on top so, people wouldn't notice. And so we're sitting in this cargo plane. It's dark. I don't know if any of you have ever been on a cargo plane. There's no real windows. There's no food service. There's no beverage service. And we're waiting on the order for takeoff, essentially the clear clearing for takeoff. And we hear some noise, and the cargo plane opens up in the back. It's got a pointy tail, and that tail opens up, and there's a ladder that gets dropped down. Apparently, some of the Revolutionary Guards had driven up on a Jeep and wanting to inspect this military cargo plane that was leaving and wanted to know what was in there. And they sent up, so the whole plane is very quiet. Obviously, if they realized who was on there and all the stuff that was on the plane, not just people, again, another one of those points where your whole life just, hangs in the balance on the decision of, young person. And so all the mothers, were telling their kids to be really quiet, and so you couldn't even hear anybody breathe. So we hear steps coming up the ladder, and it's still light out, and so all you can see is a shadow with, the gun. And right at that moment, one of the babies starts crying. And you can just, I remember, I held my breath because I thought, well, this is it. I mean, we've come all this way, and he just kind of must have looked inside, and then he said to whoever was driving the Jeep, there's nothing here.
Can you imagine how in a second, in a moment, everything in your life could have changed? He could have said, there are people here. There's a baby on board. They're trying to escape. And how that would have changed your life. And it just tells us in an instant, in a moment, how everything happens. It's almost like it's preordained in a way. It's unbelievable, because you were the last plane out, and in a moment, one person who came on a plane who could have turned around to the other rebels and said, there are people in this plane, stop the plane, said there's nothing here. That to me is one of the most amazing stories I have ever heard. That is so incredible.
He made a, no matter what his beliefs were, I think hearing that baby cry made him, at that moment, make a decision. That was, the moral decision.
That was the moral decision to make. That was incredible. So, and I think about your story, and I tell that to everybody. I said, you talk about an Argo story. This is truly it. So you end up coming to the United States. Had you ever been here before?
I hadn't been. My mom had been. I used to go to Europe as a child, and spend my summers there. So I'd never been to the U.S. My mom had been with my brother in 1976, and many times before. So for me, it was the first time.
So what did you think you're going to do? You come to this new country. You now have left everything you own. Your father was the successful surgeon, and you start with nothing. So tell us about what that experience was like.
I wish I could tell you I was so wise as a kid, as an 11-year-old, and I knew all the stuff. You really, at least for me, it was day by day. I knew that the life I had before was likely gone. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know when I was going to see my father. I knew it was going to be very different. I mean, I'd been taught English. I went to a private school, but my English wasn't good enough to, be able to go to a regular school and understand everything. So I used to study the dictionary every night. I think, at some point in my mind, I sort of made that decision that either I was going to bemoan the loss of whatever privilege I had, which frankly wasn't going to get me anywhere, or I was going to do the best that I could and realize that it was all up to me. It's not my, yes, my parents are there and they take care of me, but ultimately my future and who I was going to become was really my choice.
I think that is so absolutely compelling that you realize, and especially at a young age. So what did you think you wanted to be? Did you know?
All my family have been doctors, and so I had thought that I wanted to become a doctor, and thank God I didn't, because to this day I faint at the sight of blood. So that doesn't make a very good doctor, not a compelling one anyway. So I became the black sheep of the family. I went to pre-med, was almost about to graduate. I went to college when I was 16 years old, and I was about to graduate when I was about a year and a half. I had I had one more year to do pre-med and go to med school, and I did a stint volunteering at a hospital where, watching my dad, and having fainted a couple of times, I realized probably not for me. So I kind of chose my marketing at random. I had no idea what marketing was. I just knew it was about as different as medicine as it could possibly be, and that's why I chose it.
And it had an M in it, so it was kind of like marketing medicine,
Yeah,
so yeah.
I could try to convince my parents that that was, a worthwhile endeavor.
So you switched to marketing. You don't know really what it is, but you switched totally. What was the response to your parents when you did this?
My mom was very supportive. I think my dad was, understandably, because for him, the very fact that we came here, he was a gifted doctor, and so the reason we could have a life was because his skills were needed. I mean, how many people do you know who can come to the Borders and say, I'm marketing? And
yeah.
yes, that's a very good argument. But, it just wasn't in me. I could understand it. I liked it scientifically, but to practice it and to, if you get sick at the sight of blood, and, I went through all of the years never having touched a cadaver, never having touched anything. I basically volunteered to do all the work for anatomy, so long as I didn't have to touch anything. And you can only carry that so far in medicine.
It's true. It really is true. It really is true, yeah. So marketing, you just have to type, or come up with ideas. So that's pretty cool. So you ended up getting where did you go to college?
University of Maryland.
Okay, and so you ended up getting a degree in marketing. And when you graduated, what was your first job?
Well, I graduated thinking that corporations were going to clamor for me and ask me what they should do strategically. And all the interviews I went, they were asking me how well I could sell. And I thought, well, that's not marketing. Don't you understand? And again, a lesson. You've got to pay your what we call paying your dues, or kind of climb up. But I started. This was back in when AT&T was a great company to join. You joined AT&T for life, and when you retired, they gave you a gold watch, and you were very lucky to be hired by AT&T. I went to a job fair, and I knew I kind of liked telecom, and at that time there was no such thing as wireless or internet. But I knew that was some way to connect people, and I kind of liked the technology. I had no idea what it was, and turned out it was selling phone systems. So that's what I did.
How were you at it? Were you good at selling phone systems?
I was not your typical salesperson, because I didn't approach it from, they put you through a huge amount of training and how to overcome objections and how to do this and how to do that. And I always sort of rebelled against it because it was a one-size solution fit all. For me, it was really more of a, not explaining what call on hold is, but, what are you trying to do? What's your, what's your business? Are you going to have somebody there staffing it all the time? And this was when voicemail was, God, I'm really dating myself. Voicemail was really, a big deal to have. So I wasn't the greatest salesperson, but I also had probably one of the worst territories ever. And I was horrible at finding directions and getting somewhere. This was before GPS. And so the joke was that I would always call the customers and say, can you kind of walk me through? I've got one of the first mobile phones in the car, and my first bill was $500 because I kept calling them and saying, okay, now where do I turn? Now where do I turn? So yeah, I wasn't the best at it, but I did all right.
You think about what we've seen in our lifetime of technology. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, we had no idea where we would go in our lifetime. And so you enter this field having no idea. So where did you go after that? What did that job lead to?
One of the best things that job did was, A, kind of get me to confront some of the fears. From the small ones, such as finding directions, to really selling to people. And B, this was at a time when I could get my MBA and have the company pay for it. So I went and got my MBA and at night. And was able to do that while, working. And one of the things I realized was, I had to work with a lot of technicians as I started to kind of move up. I was working with more complex phone systems, had to work with technicians, and I realized that the way you ask a question, particularly from a techie, determines the response you get. And unless you understand the technology, you really can't, you're not going to be good at communicating. And so I'd gotten my MBA, and then I realized, you know what, I really need to understand the technology. So I went back. At that time I was working for Bell Atlantic, which is now Verizon, and took advantage of their program to get a master's in information science.
So, wow. So you have 2 masters and a master's in information science. And that was like at the early days of understanding information science.
Yeah, designing systems. And so it's not about developing code, I never wanted to know how to code, but I really wanted to understand, how do you take a need? To me, it's problem solving. How do you take a need? How do you take a vision? And then how do you define requirements in such a way that you can build a system that doesn't crash?
Do you see the ingenuity here? I mean, it's like there's an emerging opportunity if I go and I move over here and I have greater understanding to ask more powerful questions. I can begin to find answers and solve problems that maybe we don't even know we have problems there yet. I think that that's really, really incredible. How many girls were in your program?
An MBA, it was probably more, and my MSIS, I think there were maybe 4 out of 20.
That's a higher number than what I thought it would have been.
Yeah.
That's really, really
but
incredible.
all my career and everything I've done, it's been mostly a male-dominated, in telecom, then going over to internet. It was mostly male-dominated, and then, here still as well.
So what was the next job you had after that? What did that lead to?
At that time, I realized, kind of going back a little bit before I got my MSIS, I had realized when I was at AT&T that this thing called the internet, was coming up, and I realized that that was probably going to eat the revenues of the company. People weren't going to. It was going to be completely life-changing. You're not going to call an 800 number if you could potentially have access to something you could see on a screen. You're not going to call long distance if this is before there was even VoIP. Right? If you could email. And email systems were in such a way that they were actually interconnected. Everybody had their own proprietary email in company. So I wrote a paper saying to my bosses saying, hey, I think this is really big. I think this is how it's going to impact your business. Here's what you ought to do. And it caught the attention of somebody in headquarters, and they said, great, you're promoted. You're going to be on a list of about 10 people who are going to work on how to bring internet services for AT&T.
That's pretty cool. Now, did you even begin to think that this is what would happen from writing that paper?
No, I had no idea. I just thought, this is what I should do. I see it. Either they're going to say you're crazy, or something's going to come out of it. I had no idea what, and it ended up being a promotion and being, getting a spot on a team that worked on how to create all sorts of internet, access and directory services for AT&T.
So the lesson here is speak up, share what you're seeing, and I think that really goes to what we really need today in our economy are people who are futuristic and innovative and perceptive of what they've seen. You've got clues all along the way. And it's speaking up because you're taking disparate ideas and you're saying, wait a minute, if this is happening, this is what's, I think, a natural progression. That must have been really cool to work with that group of people at that time.
It was. I mean, one of the things I really believe in, and I think I'd made this my sort of favorite quote, was if you want to predict the future, you got to invent it. So,
is that your quote? Did you make that up?
No. I read it somewhere and I thought, damn, that's really good. I'm going to steal it.
All right, yeah, I like it. I'm going to steal it now too. Okay, so.
But for me, waiting to see what somebody else's vision of this might be wasn't the way. It was my way of saying, okay, how. The most powerful questions you can ask is not the what or the how. Those are all what happened, how did it happen, so what. It's the why not, or the why, or the what if. And so if you're going to predict the future, it's not, you can't predict it by saying what happened, how did it happen? It's all, past.
Right.
It is asking, well, what if? Why not? Why not do it this way? And that is what provokes not only you but other people to engage in a dialogue and say, oh, well, why don't we do it this way? And that was exciting for me.
So how many people were in this team that you come into? I mean, these are the thought leaders. These are the people out there conjecturing what's going to happen. We're AT&T. We are the system in the world at that time. It wasn't broken up yet, correct? It was still.
It was broken up, but it hadn't lost the directory services.
Okay.
Yet.
Okay.
So it had broken up into Baby Bells, but it hadn't lost the directory services. And it was very exciting, but I hadn't predicted the regulatory impact, which would then break up the business into what was considered content, what was considered access. And so I got stuck in access.
Okay.
And a parallel to this is the IBM Apple story, where IBM Microsoft story, where Microsoft knew that it was really the programs and the content and the access to the user interface, and IBM thought it was the hardware. Because big companies, incumbents, tend to focus on what they've already invested and trying to make the most of it. And that's what AT&T did. They had lines, they had undersea cables, they were known for access. What's this thing called directory? Why do I care? So they gave that up. And if you think about directory, that became the hosting, that became the online yellow pages, So that was where the future was.
Interesting. In hindsight, did they have an option to give it up, or they didn't have a choice to give it up?
I think they had an option, but certainly I wasn't there at the table. So my impression is that they had an option, but the prevailing thought was, we've gotten all these, access points. They had just launched a product, ISDN, and our joke for it was, it stands for I still don't know, because it was, just trying to monetize the copper wires that they had laid and try to make something of it. And frankly, if you're going to invent the future, you can't do it on the back of old technology, because that really limits what you're able to do. Copper wire is only limited by its capabilities. So if you say that's my future and that's how I'm going to provide access, you're not going to think wireless.
But we couldn't even begin to imagine. We could not have begun to imagine what was going to come out of this. I mean, there are people like you and all these other innovators sitting around the table. I mean, there are people who actually pulled together futurist groups. And I actually was invited by, I think it was purely an accident, but there's a group of the top 50 futurists they pull together every year.
I don't think it was by accident, but go ahead.
Well, I was surprised. But they bring in people from Europe, from MIT, from Harvard, and you go out there and you conjecture based on what's happening in technology. It was one of the most exciting experiences I've ever had in my life, to sit there with that amazing brain power, pulling up your laptop and forecasting and writing on whiteboards what's going to happen. So, but what's really interesting, though, this moved you to help with a startup. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that.
The
.mobi.